Welcome, everyone. So this is kind of a little mini workshop for the Cardano Voltaire era. We had a big workshop in Colorado to kind of kick off the design and iteration on what governance is going to look like. Right now, kind of the primary proposal people are focusing on is SIP 1694, but there are kind of a number of satellite proposals that need to get written to make sure that governance is healthy, because SIP 1694 doesn't cover all of it. Neither do the competing SIPs. Like I think there's a SIP 1776, and I think there's another one that I haven't had a chance to read yet. But one of those satellite proposals is focused around what metadata do you or can you attach to an action that you take in governance. For example, when you create a proposal, there may be some kind of justification that you want to attach to that proposal. Like, here's why we should pay this amount to this project, or here's why we need to update these protocol parameters or go through this hard fork. And that data currently is not being stored on chain because the ledger can't do anything with it. And in fact, storing kind of arbitrary free-form text data on chain or non-text data on chain is pretty scary from like a regulatory perspective, because people can embed lots of malicious content in there. And so like the design of transaction metadata, for example, has some tricks to make sure that that it is difficult to force every node operator to store your malicious data. So we want to attach some data to each of these proposals, but we don't necessarily want to store it directly on chain. And so what we talked about in Colorado was how do you attach and correlate that data so that you have a strong link between the action that's actually committed on chain and this extra metadata that's surrounding it. The mechanism that's being used by the ledger to maintain that link is what we're calling anchors, at least according to SIP 1694. Maybe other proposals will have their own solutions, but we have this notion of an anchor. An anchor is a URL and the hash of whatever data you should find at that URL. So what this does is it turns the ledger, the blockchain, into kind of the common town square where you go to find and index all of the data, but not necessarily the hosting place for that data. And it strikes a nice balance between having confidence in what you go and find, because we have a hash, and so we can tell if the data has been changed since that transaction made its way on chain, without kind of clogging up the ledger state itself with all of that data. I don't know if everybody here has read the gist that I posted, but I'll go ahead and share my screen. And this is just kind of a draft document for what I was thinking, but I got kind of this far into writing it and had the thought, like, why should I be writing this in a vacuum? Hence this this little mini workshop. So there's a number of you here that I know just intend to listen, and a number that you want to participate. Totally open to all kinds of participation. I really don't want to just sit here and talk for 2 hours. That'd be hard on my voice and wouldn't really kind of serve the purpose of like inviting the community in to help draft this with me. But don't feel obligated to participate either if you kind of are just listening for record keeping sake. And then, in case I didn't say this once the recording started, this is being recorded and will be uploaded to the Sundae Swap YouTube channel after. So if you want to reference back to this, or if you want to share it with some of your colleagues or anything like that, I'll tweet out the link and it'll be totally available. So to get started, why don't I pause there? So here's kind of how I plan to structure this. So I'll go over what I've written so far. Then I'll go over a comment that somebody left on the gist, Santiago from the community, who can't make it today, likely. He had a really good suggestion, so we'll go over that, and we'll have a discussion on the pros and cons of that. Maybe update. It's particularly around the versioning section is kind of what it will impact the most. And so we'll kind of maybe draft a revision to that section. And then there's each of these kind of governance actions that can take place. And we'll kind of go through and define what properties we might want to specify for each of them, right? So like timestamp, language, etc. So that's kind of my outline for it. And there's going to be people joining kind of throughout. And so I'm not going to annoy everybody by recapping the whole thing. I am recording the transcript, so I don't know if the transcript is available to people who join late, kind of in real time. But hopefully you can catch up based on context. So I'll pause there. Does that outline sound good to everybody? Any questions that, like, at a high level, why we're doing this, or that aren't answered by, you know, we'll dig into the details, but just any high level things that people want to talk about or you know, present, any priorities that you have from whichever project you're coming from, that you want to kind of lay out ahead of time or anything like that? Okay, cool. I'll take silence as consent to continue. So like I was saying, one of the important things about the way that SIP 6094 and likely other proposals are structuring this link to the metadata is that it's completely freeform. And that's you know, many people that I've talked to and myself believe that that's a really important property for it to have. From a kind of philosophical freedom of speech, I can publish whatever data for the proposal that I'm making, and I don't have to you know, conform to any system. I can publish a song attached to explain my proposal or whatever, right? So it's really from a core freedom of speech standpoint, we don't and can't enforce anything about the data that's attached to that. That being said, for most cases, it is very beneficial and effective to have kind of a common standard for people to work from, a recommended standard. It's not enforced by the ledger anywhere, so that people building tooling, people building wallets and the blockchain explorers and dApps that want to integrate with it, and any number of other things that we haven't thought of yet. People who want to build this tooling can rely on some amount of common structure for the bulk of cases. And if they encounter something that doesn't match this structure, they kind of can degrade gracefully into, like, here's the raw data, I don't know what to do with it. But in the cases where that data or that standard is followed, you can provide much richer experiences. So, for example, a blockchain explorer, when you are viewing a proposal, might be able, if it has rich data about who is proposing it, what the, like, who is co-sponsoring it, like, so who's like pre-signed off on the proposal, you know, maybe the proposal makes reference to previous proposals. The blockchain explorer that's letting you read that proposal, or the wallet that's letting you read that proposal to vote on it, can provide deep, rich links to that. It can say, you know, click here to view the voting history of these DREPs that have signed off on, or that have co-sponsored this proposal. Or, you know, here are the references that we're linking to for previous proposals, and then we're going to show directly there whether they passed or failed. So you don't have to go and look up a whole separate proposal, right? So having this rich interconnected metadata as a recommended standard means that we can build very quickly a rich interconnected ecosystem of tooling that is really essential to the average end user's ability to effectively participate in governance. So that's kind of a summary of this motivation section of why we're why have a standard at all, as opposed to just attach whatever data you want and we'll make do. I'll pause there and see if anybody has anything they want to chime in on. Nope, doesn't sound like it. Okay, so here's maybe where people have more opinions. Here, so this section outlines the requirements of the standard. I use words like must not, required, shall not, etc. in the kind of standard RFC definition. If you haven't seen this before, it's kind of just laying out, how an implementer of the specification should interpret the word must, if there's any ambiguity. And so the basic outline of this is you attach a URL to the transaction that you are publishing with the governance metadata. So when you submit a proposal, you attach the URL to that leads to a JSON document. That JSON document, you also include the SHA-256 hash of that JSON document. You should, now this isn't a requirement, but you should, where possible, use some kind of long-term content addressable archival storage, like IPFS or Arweave. The document should be formatted for human readability because, while we're going to be building machine tools to read and interpret and present this data, users should always be able to kind of click around and navigate and validate for themselves, kind of in a trust but verify way. And so we want to make a strong recommendation to people publishing that metadata that it should be in, nicely indented new lines for each field, what you're expected, instead of just crammed all into a big blob of text that people can't read. And then, so that's at a high level, right? It's just a JSON document that we link to and we provide the hash. And then the rest of this document deals with, okay, but what goes into that JSON document? Does anybody have any opinions? Does anybody think we should be using CBOR or a specific type of JSON or protocol buffers or anything like that? Maybe we can have that discussion if anybody has opinions on that.
Maybe just not different than what was common so far in the transaction creation or in the transaction handling.
You mean follow the transaction metadata standard?
Yeah.
Yeah, the main reason I didn't do that is because this stuff isn't being stored on chain, and
okay.
the transaction metadata standard basically is specifically designed for a couple of different things that aren't in play here. One, it's CBOR or JSON translated to CBOR, so there's some awkward restrictions on how that's structured. And two, it does things like force you to break up strings into 64 character strings, so that the reason for that is if somebody publishes a virus on chain, they can't have a big blob of text that has the contents of virus or other questionable illegal content. They have to break it up into small chunks so that if you were to access that content, it requires an act of assembly, so that every stake pool operator isn't storing that data kind of contiguously. So and that doesn't necessarily make sense to enforce if we're hosting this data off chain.
Mm-hmm. Okay, then I agree. I didn't mean exactly like the thing on chain, but more so if a developer has to look at a library or a mechanism or something that just don't use something completely different, but as similar as possible to.
Yeah, agreed. And that was kind of my motivation behind choosing JSON, because it's the the most ubiquitous format, I think, that there is, and the most human readable as well, because we could choose a binary format, but that's going to really like lock out a bunch of users from kind of following the trust but verify philosophy of like, okay, well, I want to check this data for myself. You suddenly have to be very technical to like actually pull out that URL and parse it into like a binary format. And how do you know that what your wallet is showing you is actually what was represented on chain? Any other thoughts here? I'm going to kind of note this down. Compared to I'll just make a note about things that we talked about during the workshop, so I can write a summary for Twitter later. Anything else that we'll get into more meat here, but anything else here? One thing that I kind of went back and forth on is throughout a lot of Cardano, we use Blake2B hashes, and whereas this is SHA-256, and I don't know, I'm not familiar with the kind of reasons that Cardano chose to go with Blake2B, but the tooling is way less ubiquitous for Blake2B, and SHA-256, I can look up a website where I can paste some content and get that hash, whereas Blake2B, I can't do that yet. And so I figured I'd go with the kind of more ubiquitous, even though it breaks with the quote unquote tradition of what the ledger uses for things. Does anybody have strong feelings about that?
I mean, I'd expected it to be Blake2B, but that doesn't mean it has to be.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I could go either way. I don't have a strong opinion. I just kind of lean very slightly towards SHA-256. So I'm going to make a note that we should get more community input on which hash. Or maybe we could make a recommendation that it's an open hash format. You can provide whatever hash you want. And then maybe they could be in like SHA-256 blah or Blake2B blah to allow extensible hashing. So I've seen some systems where you take the hash, whatever it is, but you prefix it with whichever algorithm you're using. So that way you can kind of extend it with whatever hashes you want, and you're not like locked into a specific hash. So that's another thing that we might want to consider. Any other thoughts here?
What about using YAML as an option instead of just JSON?
Sure. And who was that? Alexander using allowing.
One thing I would say is that in SIP 1694 it does specify JSON.
Oh, it does?
I'm pretty sure it does.
Interesting.
I would say 95% sure. I can check. Well,
yeah. Well, we already know that the even if it says that, the ledger isn't enforcing that, because from within the ledger rules, it's not going to go make HTTP requests and check the format of the document. That's the whole reason for having like a community standard. So in theory, that data could not exist. It could be an MP3 file, and so maybe that's a revision to the SIP to kind of remove that detail and leave it to this document to specify.
So
yeah, if you whoever was saying that the SIP specifies JSON, maybe can you double check that for us while we talk about the next section?
Yeah, I'm just checking now.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, so that's probably a good feedback that we can provide to SIP 1694 of like, unless that's going to be enforced, is there value in specifying that from within that particular SIP? Cool. So, and this is following the same theme as like pool metadata, for example, in that if you've worked with pool metadata, none of this is really surprising. The maybe like one additional thing that we're calling out here is basically this standard is making a recommendation. It's not required, but it's making the recommendation that if you're going to host content, so like for example, a wallet, when you click to vote, it could let you type in like the reason you're voting that way, and then the wallet could go and host it for you somewhere. And so we're making the recommendation that wallet should choose some content addressable and long-term archival platform like IPFS or Arweave, so that there's no risk that it can change, invalidating the hash, and it's available for as long as people want to access it and things like that. So, and that I don't think that's ever kind of called out as good practice for the pool metadata. Okay, cool. So the next section is about versioning. And so like, whenever you're specifying a standard, it should be aware upfront that it might need to evolve. And that's really important because kind of retrofitting versioning in later is really hard. And so this lays out how, my personal preference for doing versioning, though I think, 10 minutes before this meeting, it changed. So we'll talk about that in a second. But basically, I was recently on SIP 30, we had a discussion about how to add versioning for the SIP 30 connector to wallets. And what we settled on was this nice extensions parameter where you could specify the SIPs that you want to enable, so to speak. So if there was a SIP about a SIP that enabled like asking for signatures without prompting the user, right? So that you could do like day trading, super rapid, like click, 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 or like chat applications or things like that. That would be an extension that you could enable when you connect to the wallet. And it's kind of like a feature negotiation like HTTP does when you connect to a server. You say, hey, I support these formats. What formats do you support? And you tell me, and then we'll work on kind of whatever the intersection is. And so I thought that would be a good model for this as well, where the metadata can specify a set of extensions, which are basically the names of SIPs that, and hey, Michael, I'm glad you could join us. I'm not going to go back and recap everything, but it is being
sorry, I'm led by
transcripted, so you can review that later if you'd like. But basically, this extensions field contains a list of SIPs that should be considered when interpreting this document, right? So we'll lay out some properties down here that we think, here is the meaning of that property. But then maybe like 6 months from now, somebody's like, hey, we forgot about this use case. It'd be really cool to track this. Or, hey, this has turned out to be awkward representing it this way. So we're going to update the way that this field, right? Maybe today we lay out that the list of co-sponsors on a proposal should just be a list of addresses. And we find out after that's deployed that that's really awkward. And so we write another SIP that says, oh, okay, well, it should actually be an array of objects with the public key and the signature from that user, right? Because we forgot to collect their signature. And so we add that SIP, and then future on-chain metadata could say, oh, and I'm using the base SIP plus that extension that modifies how this field is interpreted or adds new fields that you should be aware of. And that way tooling authors can choose which extensions they support. And one of the recommendations we make down here at the bottom is like, there should always be a graceful degrade back down to like just show the raw content. But if you can support these things, then you should, right? And you choose which ones. And the reason I like this approach rather than like, oh, there's a version number attached to it, is because whenever you have a version number and you're saying, okay, well then, we're now defining version 2 of this spec, there's going to be a lot of competition and a lot of disagreement and kind of paralysis around deciding what goes into that next version, right? Some people think it should be this and others think it should be this. And how do you resolve that conflict? And what this proposal does is say, well, that conflict just doesn't come up, right? People write their own SIPs for what makes sense for them. And it's the tooling authors and the kind of ecosystem that gets to organically decide what works best and what provides the best user experience and what doesn't. It does make it a little bit more painful for tooling authors because they have to some extent keep up with these SIPs, but it's also not something that I expect to be on the order of magnitude of like once every week. It's like, okay, maybe there's like 1 or 2 SIPs a year or every few years that extend this. And so I don't think it should be that big of a burden. That being said, right before this, we started this, Santiago from TXPipe left a comment on the gist that I had posted. So I'll go ahead and pull that up. And it's basically a similar idea, but using a predefined standard for that, which is JSON LD. So JSON LD is JSON for linking data. And it's basically a standard for saying, here is the schema or context that this document exists in. Here's how the document is identified. Here's how we're linking to other resources, things like that. And it provides, the context can be an array of, okay, the aggregate of these contexts. So it includes this SIP for, here's the base level definitions. And then you can pull in these other SIPs in a similar way. So it's very similar to the proposal that's outlined here, but there's an actual kind of industry adopted standard for how to specify that. And so I thought that was a really good idea, and it brings in a lot of other nice properties of like strongly typed objects and the ability to provide links and strong interconnectedness to the metadata. So I'll kind of pause there. Anybody have any thoughts on either this or JSON LD? Does anybody have experience working with JSON LD to say, hey, it's actually a really pain in the ass to work with, et cetera, or this kind of goes to the point Marcus was making about, let's not invent something brand new. Let's, let's use kind of some industry standards if we can.
Yeah, so if I just can give a short comment, I really, really like this idea. So industry standards, especially showing some respect on completely blockchain external things like this standard, looks to me like makes a lot of sense. And I will then try to extend this concept, so use it as you described it here and now for this CIP, but maybe it is even worth thinking about a proper CIP to propose a versioning standard for all the living protocols and CIPs that maybe need some versioning in order to understand what's compatible and not.
For sure, yeah. And I think it's a tall glass of water for us to get alignment across everything. So I think what we can do is just on a case-by-case basis start as an industry, if we like this, advocating for it in each SIP that comes up and in each revision that we make to old SIPs, and say, hey, can we evolve towards a common standard? I think JSON LD is a great choice for that. I've never worked with it directly, so if anybody has experience with it, speak now and say, hey, it's actually a really nightmarish pain in the ass, we should use JSON schema instead, or something like that. But in general, like at first blush, I really like this idea. Any other thoughts? And please, I want to encourage, if you feel comfortable and you have a thought, there's no dumb thoughts. I don't want to just sit here and talk at people for several hours. Thanks, Marcus and Thomas and Alexander for participating so far. But if anybody else wants to chime in, please do.
I also agree. I really like the compositional nature of this. I think it makes it easy to implement for tooling as well. Like you can just implement blocks of functionality and not have to implement everything at once. So I think that's pretty cool.
This section could be. Alexander. That's spell your name, right?
Yeah, I go by Alex. You can just...
Cool. Emphasized compositional nature of the TIFF that accepts and add entire blocks of code, and these this meshes nicely with other parallel proposals. Cool. Anybody else have any other thoughts that and also up here I'm going to add a section for acknowledgements. Anybody not want to be mentioned in the acknowledgements, either post in chat or raise your hand. Otherwise, I'm gonna jot down everybody's name who attended. Leo.
Maybe one thing where we work on right now with quite since a while actually with Swarm, and now with the Singularity Net ecosystem, especially with the ambassadors program, also really in regard to metadata, also with the JSON file and especially to governance actions. So it's a little different. We definitely want to have governance documents on chain, because we really see this, it's really massive value of blockchain actually to have it as a history, right? Going out of just value and all this stuff. Where we go to right now is to say, okay, we developed quite a process to track contributions through project management and all this stuff and everything. But what we are heading to right now is to say we can have a document as an open policy NFT, the creation of the document itself, which is maybe even more important than, let's say, the outcoming result, because once again, to the creation of the history, who wrote it, when did they wrote it, also to keep it accountable and all the stuff. Decide that, okay, when we put the document as an open policy NFT and we fed the metadata of the creation of the document, which itself is represented in the transaction metadata, gets fed into the NFT, then you can actually build a pretty nice thing where I put a link of an example, for example, how we use the metadata for transactions, also based on JSON files in the live chat.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And something we talked about in Longmont extensively was how important that history, not just of a particular proposal, but the history of how a DREP is voting. And, are they super two-faced and switching based on whoever's paying them versus do they have a consistent set of values that they represent each time they make a vote and things like that? It's all really important. The biggest concerns that were raised and kind of what this attempts to strike a middle ground with is that there are really scary, that works, storing everything on chain works beautifully when when everybody's behaving well, right? But if somebody were to take some kind of material virus or child pornography or something that is really reprehensible and illegal, and embed that as is unmutilated, so to speak, then now you have every stake pool operator is storing that on disk and in memory, and every single full node operator, every relay, every person running dataless. And so it gets like terrifying, right? Of like, okay, that's going to really get some, like, people are going to come after Cardano, right? And so, for example, that's why the transaction metadata forces you to split strings into an array of strings, each with 64 characters, because at the very least, if somebody tries to store that content, it's not there, it's not stored. You have to interpret it, you have to assemble it yourself in order to access that content. So that's one concern. The second concern is Cardano has not really been built for data availability and like storing massive amounts of data, right? And so if we want if we want to store lots of rich history and like videos or public speeches attached to these proposals in favor of it, storing it on chain in NFTs and stuff isn't the most efficient way to do it. And so I think what the ideal evolution is to find a way, like find a data availability solution for Cardano that meshes well with this, and then integrate it with this proposal, right? And so that's the idea behind recommending IPFS or Arweave, is that, oh, these are like long-term data availability, and then as Cardano gets deep integration and validation of that kind of data availability, we can, like, this easily transitions to that, right? If there is a like separate chain that's optimized for file storage, that the stake pool operators are validating, oh, I'm publishing this hash and it should be a file on this other chain, and the SPOs reject the block if it's not, right? That's an interesting way to evolve this, but we can also get started without having to build out that technology. We had a couple people raise their hands. I don't know what order they were raised in, but Mohammed, if you want, you're the one with your hand raised right now, if you want to talk about something.
Just can we have like a section that's stored in a chain, so that assuming in the proposal to allow the ledger to have the chance to process this like proposal. So this is
so the what's, at least according to the current CIP, and probably the, this isn't a SIP 1694 thing. This is generally pretty agnostic to whatever SIP gets adopted. But in the ones that I've read, the data that gets stored on chain is the actionable data, right? So like the new constitutional committee, or the new protocol parameters that are going to get adopted, or the list of addresses, stake addresses, and amounts that are going to get paid out of the treasury, right? The actionable data that the ledger can and must validate is stored on chain. And then in addition, we store these anchors, which are the URL to this data, right? And so that way, the way I was describing it is the ledger becomes the town square that you go to. Everybody has a canonical place to go to find and index where they should be looking for this data, right? Because if it wasn't stored on or referenced on chain at all, and we just said, okay, well, yeah, somebody's going to post a blog post explaining the motivation for the proposal and then tweet about it. And so then you should say, like, somebody's tweeting, oh, proposal XYZ, here's why I proposed it. Like, now somebody's going to tweet about it. Somebody's going to post their stuff on Mastodon. Somebody's going to create a GitHub for theirs. There's no like common place for the tooling to go and find the data, right? It kind of just has to be, well, as a user, you go and you find it, right? Or like, whatever. So by having that reference on chain, we get that, like, okay, it's easy to go and discover. And it's easy to, I'm sure there will be community nonprofit projects that go and download and store and archive for long-term this data. It's not as reliable or permanent or immutable, or I mean, it's immutable because it's hash indexed, right? You have the hash, so you know if it's changed, but it's not as like solid as storing it in the ledger and like replicating it across every stake pool operator, for example, or every full node. But it is still, you know, fairly reliable and fairly robust. Yeah, Michael, you raised your hand.
Yeah, Paisu, definitely agree with what you said about the content being actionable for most of the governance action types. But then in Colorado, we decided to add a governance action type 7, which is informational or open format, or however you want to describe it. Does that, is that accounted for somewhere here? And then sorry if I missed it earlier.
Yeah, I think the info action just like it has an identifier and an anchor, right? So it's linking in the same way as everything else to its off-chain like explanation. I don't know. I think for probably the same reasons, the Ledger team wants to avoid storing any like free-form text data on chain specifically, but yeah, I don't actually know what the SIP says.
Got it. So it'll be the same way. Thomas, I know this is something we were wondering about earlier, right? Makes sense.
I got a message that I had to look at. Yeah, so had a discussion about storing things on chain. Probably still. Oh, yeah, I definitely agree that there's like a solidity and a permanence that comes from storing things on chain that I really like. And I think there's the desire for that. So I think long term, we want to figure out how to achieve that. My point is just that like it's probably a really bad idea to store it on the ledger as it is today, and we don't have a Cardano data availability solution. Though, you know, I'm sure Sebastian will. That's one of his, you know, big talking points is he really wants a data availability solution, and so we'll have one. You know, DC Spark will build one if nobody else will. Cool. Any other thoughts? Cool. So then, you know, the one of the like kind of the bulk of the work is in enumerating through this what fields we want on each of these types of metadata. And so I want to like spend the remainder of the workshop talking about that. But before we do that, there's this section at the end that I just kind of want to go through briefly and see if anybody has ideas to add to this. And so these are things that like fall outside of the specification specifically, and are more around like, okay, we put a lot of thought into what goes into, you know, this governance stuff. What are some best practices that we can provide to accelerate tool authors and developers, so that like, you know, things they might not think of when they're building this. So for example, if the hash and the anchor, like the hash that's stored on chain, doesn't match the computed hash, that has to be obvious to the user, right? Because it means somebody has changed that, and they may be manipulating your vote by saying, oh, you know, here's the extra things that I thought of, or the like reasonings that I'm changing after I've collected a bunch of your votes or whatever. Similarly, I think we should recommend that tools always provide like an escape hatch for expert users. So like a link to go and view the data directly raw themselves. I think that we should recommend that people degrade gracefully to that simple raw content view. So for example, if the metadata, you know, is malformed, it's not actually JSON, it's, you know, whatever, we still want to expose that information to people. I think we should, like, when there are links and cross references, and this is where JSON-LD is really powerful here, then provide like a rich navigable experience for that data. So for example, a proposal may link to sponsoring DREPs, and they may have their own view within the tool. So like click on that DREP to see their voting history or whatever. so for example, this says if you're hosting the content for the user, you should use a content addressable platform like IPFS or Arweave. This was mentioned above. And if the content is self-hosted, warn the user about changing the content. So for example, from the Cardano CLI, if I enter in my own URL and my own hash, well, first the hash should be computed for you, right? Don't let the user enter the hash, because a lot of people mess that up with pool metadata. So the CLI can go and fetch that data, hash it so that we know it's following the standard. But if it's not kind of one of these recognized long-term storage platforms, you can recommend like display a warning to the user, like, hey, just so you know, you can't change this data, otherwise it's going to invalidate this hash. You can't change the hash after the fact. Because like what happens a lot, I think Adam Dean ran the numbers, and 40% of pool metadata is invalid because they've updated it and not updated the hash on chain. And so this section is about like recommendations we can make to tool authors to cut down on mistakes like that. Does anybody have any other ideas of like best practices we can present to people building tools to save them a bunch of time and really create the best ecosystem-wide user experience we can?
Maybe not a direct answer to this question, but actually I was wondering, Marcus, if you're on the line, is there any connection between this and the SPO voting concept you're working on?
Actually not. So my question about the format was very interesting. I'm just not. So I have to think about. I cannot give a quick answer now. I have to look at the pool metadata, because it was actually one of the first CIPs, 0006, to think about extended pool metadata. And it may make sense to put all together and consider if there is some improvement. Michael, to your question, for now, the SPO poll will have metadata, but we tried to consciously keep it as simple as possible. So for now, for this trial run, hopefully it is enough to learn and to see it in practice, that we also get some learning and better understanding for this approach here. So in order to see, if we just start using it in a consciously very simple, basic way, and then we understand better where we need to pay more attention or improve and add some security measures or usability things. That's my idea.
Or does the need arise for a standard in the future, depending on how it goes?
Yeah, it was consciously not that we tried to already introduce a standard here just with this trial poll.
Makes sense. Thanks.
I think I missed some of that, but I kind of tried to summarize it with, Marcus wants to think deeply about pool metadata and the notion of extended metadata, and if there are lessons we can learn and check that. One interesting thing that brings up is the pattern of having the immutable pool metadata and then have it have a URL that links to extended pool metadata, and that can change, is really interesting. So, for example, maybe when you publish the proposal, you have like a justification for it. But what happens if new data becomes available and you want to direct people to like, hey, here is kind of extended metadata that there's less guarantees about its like sustaining power, or this may be updated, but we still have a way to link to that, right? If you want to, here is where you can find kind of more quote unquote up-to-date addendums, so to speak. So should we have a notion of where to find addendums which might change / be added, and thus we can't include update its metadata because it will change the hash, but we can add a type of data that is less permanent. For example, revisions, new information that comes to life, a DREP has their mind changed on a vote, etc. So as we're thinking about this section, that's something that we might want to include and say, hey, across all of these, maybe there's a URL that like we link to, or maybe there's a property in the JSON that we say, when you're hashing the JSON document, delete this property so that you can change the data, but like the actual JSON that's being hashed doesn't change, or something like that. I don't know exactly how to do it, so maybe people have ideas there. Okay, and so then the bulk of it that we'll maybe spend the rest of the hour doing.
Oh, sorry, I just had something to add.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm a bit uneasy about having the word must in the best practices. So you've got on the first one, you must make it obvious when the hash is different to the metadata, and you know, if from a product perspective, if you're building an something quickly and you're creating an MVP first product, you might want to bring out a product that is a lot more lightweight, for example, and so to say that they must do something, it might not be optimal, especially in this case where you're providing a hash of the metadata, like the JSON metadata that you've provided, and the actual the link or whatever you've provided in the metadata might be the same, but the actual data that it points to might have changed. So it doesn't necessarily provide like a full fail-safe to the.
Well, so in terms of the anchor,
yeah,
the purpose of the anchor is not like, it's not URL and hash of the URL. It's URL and hash of the content that you should find at the URL. And what that does is it says, like, it makes it detectable if somebody updates that data after the fact, right? And so I kind of see what you're getting at of like, oh, if these are best practices, why are we using the word must?
Yeah.
But like the reason I phrased it this way is because this one is really like so super important from a like an attack vector perspective of being able to manipulate and mislead voters, that I think we really should set that expectation that, you know, it doesn't take long to do a network request, hash the results, and then, you know, do something, make it obvious to the user, whether it's a banner that says, hey, this data differs from, you know, has been changed since it was published. Like, that's something I think you could fit in an MVP. And so I think setting that standard to say, hey, like, this is really the only thing that is really super important is kind of why I went this way. Does anybody else have strong feelings about that?
But I mean, it does add complexity. I mean, if you're building an app that's based on this, and then your app would have to go to the metadata and then read the metadata and then hash the metadata and then compare the hashes. I'm not saying it's not important. I'm just saying that to say it's a must.
Yeah, because like, is it actually like, yes, strictly speaking, it does add complexity, but given that we're like, at least as written right now, maybe this changes, but, you know, using a SHA-256, it's like, you know, it seems like an hour worth of work, right? Like, make the network request to fetch the metadata, compute the hash, and then display a warning if that hash doesn't exist. I worry about if we change this to should, then, you know, like to your point, somebody says, oh, well, it's just an MVP, we can launch this, and then they just never get around to fixing it, right? To, you know, at the end of the day, that none of this is enforceable, right? People can do whatever they want, but like, this is Maybe we avoid must or should. It is imperative. That way we're not, from the RFC 2119 standard, we're not saying must in the sense of like that, but like we're still emphasizing that
I
like
think it's a good clarification. Yeah.
this is really important from an integrity standpoint. User votes, validators, etc. Right. So, for example, one of the things that is going to be represented in this metadata is the Cardano Constitution. Right. The Cardano Constitution will be a hash of that, of the content. The actual Constitution isn't stored on chain, and so, at least according to 1694, and so. If that's changed after the fact, people are going to notice, and there'll be hell raised on Twitter. But like, then how do people really know for sure? What was there? Or if you put forward a proposal and it outlines like, for example, a funding request for a project, right? Some project comes along and they say, hey, pay us to build this thing, and they list out 100 super awesome features, and they get 10 million ADA to build it, and then they update the thing to like display fewer things and say, hey, you voted for this list of things. Yes, you'll still be able to, like, the technical user will still be able to know, or people using other tools will still be able to know, but the voters that are within that tool that you're using have still been misled, and it undermines the confidence in this whole like ability to do governance. So I can understand, like, yes, we did outline this according to RFC 2119, and they treat must very, very seriously. And like, because we can't enforce this anyway, you might not want to use must, but like, I really do think it's important that we don't give people an out to be lazy about this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make a lot of sense.
Okay. And is this a good compromise for, like, okay, yeah, we won't use the word must because we can't enforce it anyway, but we do want to like drive that point home for people?
Yeah, is there like a lesser standard where you could just warn people that you're not checking the hashes and that they should check the hash?
Yeah, so we don't use must. No, use must in the RFC because we don't use must in the RFC 2109 sense because it's unenforceable anyway. But if you don't check these hashes, you should, I'm going to emphasize that heavily. How's that?
Yeah, that's great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. So let's go on to this section. So we'll spend maybe the rest of the next hour talking about this. My throat's getting a little sore, so really I kind of want to be quiet and let people in the audience, if you guys have ideas for what are some properties we should be tracking for each of these. So I'll add a section for common properties, and then ones that are specific to each of these actions. So, when you create a proposal, when you register as a DREP, when you retire as a DREP, when you cast your vote, when you delegate to the DREP, and then cast constitutional vote. So I think it's a separate action when the Constitutional Committee casts their vote. Is there any other actions according to SIP 1694? Are there any other actions that I'm missing here?
I think you had the fund and reserve movements somehow, right?
Huh?
You had the fund and reserve movements somehow, right?
Those are just proposals, right?
Is it? Okay.
Like you're talking about treasury, like when you pay out of the treasury, or
Exactly, yes.
yeah. So those are just a type of proposal, and so maybe
Yeah, it's a type
here-
of proposal. I do wonder if there's anything specific to treasury related proposals that we want to account for.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head now, but that's a valid point.
When you say proposal, are you talking about governance actions?
Yeah. So like proposing a state of no confidence, proposing a new constitution, proposing a treasury payout, proposing new protocol parameters, etc.
Would it be possible to align the language with SIP 1694, so instead of proposal, use governance action?
Sure. So I was using governance action for everything, right? So like casting a vote, etc. But what term do we want to use here? So governance transactions, maybe?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I think Thomas is right. Proposals are specifically called governance actions in the SIP.
Proposing a governance action, registering as a DREP. I'm still a strong proponent that we should just rename DREP to voter. When you retire, casting a vote.
Maybe also a lesson we can learn from Catalyst, because also on the summit 2020 last year, we had a Catalyst workshop at the Cardano summit. What was actually quite interesting, the topic which was the most raised in the concern and the workshop there was accountability and auditability. And looking on CIP 1694, didn't saw that much yet any strong thoughts going into this direction. Where's the accountability and auditability of the whole thing fitting in, especially also governance actions?
Yeah, and so
Well, it's
I
on
think the
chain.
auditability. Oh, go ahead.
Because this
It's on
something
chain. Anyone looking at the chain basically can audit and basically see what the results are. The problem with Catalyst was it was a private chain that people basically couldn't touch.
Yeah.
No, it's somehow not really, because now you count a little bit on, let's say, best behavior that people actually will go and audit and check the stuff. And most of people already are not able to, because after the end, you have a shitload of data.
Well,
And when it's not incentivized and implemented in the system itself, who's stepping up and doing this? Most of the people won't actually.
I think
that's
a really
not
good
the
point.
thing, though. When you're talking about auditability, you're talking about the data being available. Someone can contract someone to audit it if they want to have something audited. The problem with Catalyst is you didn't have any auditability of getting the data. It was in a private chain that basically was not distributed and basically was centrally managed by Catalyst.
That's a good point, yeah. Though it wouldn't change a lot even if it would be on public.
Yeah, I think there's the kind of divide that that both of you are getting at is the difference between auditability, which is the just raw ability to access the data in a reliable, transparent way, and accountability, which is, okay, but is anybody actually doing that? What are the consequences if that data shows something bad, like a pattern of bad behavior, things like that? And I think that's super critical for governance. I think solving that as a whole is maybe a bit outside the scope of this SIP, But what this SIP can do to contribute to that is make sure that the data that we're encouraging gets collected is kind of in service of those goals. So for example, for everything here, we should probably collect, you know, an author plus signature, maybe plus optional bid, right? So like the author and the signature is going to be whoever submits the transaction usually, right? And that's on chain. But then there's also like, you know, maybe we want a notion of co-authors plus signatures, or co-authors slash co-sponsors plus optional bids. So the idea here is like if we integrate with, or if we recommend integration with Atala Prism or the, you know, W3C DID standards, then people can attach their public identity and reputation to what they're proposing. And then when you build these accountability tools that show, for example, the voting history of a DREP, you can say, hey, you know, we have cryptographic proof that the person who voted and flip-flopped on this every other proposal, or like who changed their vote at the last minute after accumulating a bunch of delegation, it's tied to like, you know, the CTO of Sundae Swap, for example. Like if I had published a DID, and I would be held accountable to whatever DID I had chosen to attach to it. Does that make sense? But it's also not required because, you know, pseudo-anonymity is also a really important part of you know, the censorship resistance of these systems. But the end user, the end voter, the end delegator should be presented with that, right? Like, oh, here is somebody who chooses to remain anonymous, and here's their justification for why, and here's somebody who is choosing to attach their identity to it, and here's their justification for why.
Makes a lot of sense how you frame it.
Yep, I agree with what you're saying there.
Cool. All right, what are some other properties that we can track? Either common to all of these different actions or specific to one of them? I mean, I have my own ideas, but I've been talking a lot now, so I want to foster participation more.
Oh, come on, you're leading this. You have your hands deeply into the whole stuff. I mean, you're doing awesome so far. What's your thoughts on it?
No, I'm not giving in. I'll give my thoughts after other people propose some, but
Yeah, I also, while we have this pause, just wanted to welcome Sam Leathers from the Cardano Core Tech team.
yeah,
if there's anything generally about this topic you wanted to opine on, or this
Hello, folks.
window in
I pretty
particular.
much just wanted to, yeah, I pretty much just wanted to sit in and hear what you guys had to say and interject and correct things when things drive me nuts.
Well, Sam, what's a property that you think we should track in the metadata?
Definitely. So like you mentioned signatures. So you have you might have some sort of time-based data that you're going to put in it as well. Like I'm putting this proposal out there on such and such date. You can technically get that from the slot number of when it's submitted, but yeah.
Sure.
Maybe
so maybe
that's
like
not necessary.
maybe like something that isn't represented on chain. Like we know when it was submitted, but we don't necessarily know like when it was written and what maybe the revision history is. So like
Right.
Authorship history.
Yeah.
So, like,
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
we have, you know, first draft, written, timestamp, other drafts, slash timestamps, maybe external or like reference. So these could be URLs to like, if you want to read those earlier drafts, here's where you can find them. Final
Maybe
draft.
even like the endorsers of the thing and basically when they endorsed as well.
Yeah, I have
For
that up here as
example,
like,
it would be really interesting to know who jumped in on the first draft and who waited until the last minute to endorse it and whatnot.
yeah. So up here, so timestamp, public key signature did. So we'll say usually for proposal creation, but maybe your vote environment has endorsements, for example. Vote illustrations. So, like, you know, the kind of most obvious use case for endorsers is when you're creating a proposal, like, oh, you know, I have these 10 other DREPs who agree with the language in this draft or whatever. But like, maybe when you are registering as a DREP, you're like, oh, these other DREPs are kind of endorsing me. Or when you're casting a vote, you're saying, you know, me and these other group of people are agreeing to vote as a block, and they, you know, agree with my reasoning for why I cast that vote. Okay, I'll add one. Justification. So free form or structured text that explains why the proposal is a good or bad idea.
The general then about meta, is it envisioned to have one standard for all the actions, or does each action has its own specific?
I think it's probably a mix of the two, right? There's probably some properties that are common across. So like another one I'll add is language, English, Spanish, etc. So that, and this is probably like an ISO language code, so that you can automatically translate between different specifications or like different things. So that's probably universal across all of these, but there's probably also some that are specific to, for example, proposal creation. So justification is probably one of those that you can attach a justification for anything, but you know, maybe a the idea that where is it? Santiago had was time and materials budgets, right? So, and I think right now we're just in kind of the brainstorming phase where we're writing down anything that we can think of. I think there's a second stage of this exercise where we filter this out, because like less is more, and maybe some of these deserve their own full specification, and we work towards like a minimal set. But I just kind of want people getting ideas out there for like what you might want to represent in this metadata.
I don't know if this would be a common one or specific to proposals, but what about reference material?
Yeah, absolutely.
So like if you want to cite sources of some other blockchain's proposal that basically is similar, or some cryptographic primitive basically that's being added in a hard fork that you want to cite a source for.
Research papers. But so yeah, I don't know if that's common or proposal specific either, because I could imagine when you're voting, like, oh, here's the reference material, here's the research paper that says that this is a bad idea, and that's why I'm voting no. I'm gonna worry less about how to classify it, and maybe we can do that in a second pass. I'm just gonna kind of focus on getting people's ideas down. One that I think is pretty specific. So when you retire as a DREP, recommended replacement. So who do you suggest your delegators follow or delegate to in your stead? So this is a way to say like, oh, I'm stepping down, but I have strong faith and confidence in XYZ. And I think we floated the idea of doing this at the protocol level, but I think people didn't like that, including me. I'm the one who originally floated that idea and that came to not like it for DREPs. But I think in the metadata, it does provide a good user experience for the end user, and they can opt in, right? So the wallet can say, hey, your DREP is, retiring, and here's who they suggest, do you want to do some research on them and maybe delegate to them? One idea here is like time limit / sensitivity information. So urgent hard fork to fix a bug, or this payout, payout deadline / maybe somebody who's asking for funding can say, if this doesn't get approved within 2 months, like we'll continue to propose this, but if this doesn't get approved in 2 months, we're going to move on with our lives. So like what is the time window in which you could consider this a relevant proposal?
Just to clarify, all of this will be in the JSON, right? Or
well, to clarify,
the data structure.
Everything, like the final list is, it's represented in the JSON, in some structured or semi-structured way, right? So like some of this just may be text fields where it's like, oh, here's how you are supposed to represent it. But like, justification, for example, there's not really any, we're not going to invent a DSL for representing the justification of a thing. But also right now I'm just trying to spitball on ideas and get everything down on paper, and then maybe I'll host a follow-up workshop because we've got about a half an hour left where we iterate on this more and like pin it down to an actual JSON spec where we say, okay, here's the ones that make sense for this core SIP. Here's the ones that like are good ideas, but maybe for a future SIP because it's like overcomplicating things. And then here's the types of those properties and the like structure for those. Right now, I'm just kind of trying to brainstorm with the community on like what would be, no good or bad ideas, but like what are some of the things that we can track. Any other thoughts or ideas? Maybe group / organization. So like this is, I think liquid democracy will, it kind of pops the bubble or the that leads to like a 2-party bicameral system. But I think you could have voting blocks and like, oh, I'm part of the Cardano DeFi Alliance, or I'm part of the like, never contingent staking alliance that always votes to just never adopt contingent staking, for example, or whatever these kind of groups and parties that might evolve when you're registering as a DREP, maybe platform, right? So like some structured, here's what your, values and policy that you're advocating for is.
And maybe like social media as well.
Yeah. So kid / social media / website / if you're a stake pool operator, stake pool information. let's see, when you're casting a vote, you basically just want to kind of justify, which we've already got the justification up here.
Maybe again, you have like a web page, or you have like a YouTube account, like a YouTube link that links to like an explanation as to why you
so maybe
voted
the
in a certain way or something.
Reference, so like external sources, external errata for more explanation, videos, lectures, etc., justifying XYZ. So it's like you can write up a summary of it, but then you have like, oh, and here are, the public talks that I gave at the Cardano Summit for why this is a good idea. And, here's the panel discussion that we had with members of the community. And here's the poll that we hosted and things like that. We kind of commented on it down here, but maybe we should have a field here for like, where to find addendums / updates. So we can't update this document because of a hash, but here's a URL / label / whatever to find potentially new information that has come to light. So for example, if we're going to propose a hard fork, then we write up like all the justification for the hard fork, but we say, and if we discover any bugs that might change why we think this is a good idea, like maybe, that we start the vote for a hard fork and it's ongoing, and then we discover a critical bug, we want to update this part of the URL. We can't go and update the initial justification, but here's an addendum. Oh, we discovered this, abort, cancel, like change your vote, emergency break, etc. And here's the like new information that has come to light. And it's better than changing the document because you can see this historical like context for why it got here. And it's obvious that this is new rather than just like we've always been at war with Eurasia style concerns. Any other thoughts? I'm just seeing a comment somebody left in chat a while ago. I want to make sure Leo Pianasola, I think I'm saying that right, said, and this was when we were discussing the must down here. Leo says, I think we should keep the must because it can be used for nefarious reasons, but they don't have a mic. So, I just want to make sure that that's captured and represented. And let me also go and add, now that you've added your name. Anything else that anybody can think of like types of information, even if you don't know how you would represent it, or even if you don't know if it's a good idea? I kind of want to just get all ideas out here for what we might crack.
I mean, with the DREP retirement, you could say why you've retired.
Yeah.
I mean, is that covered elsewhere? I don't.
Yeah, like that's kind of why I put justification up here, because like any of these can be justified, right? But maybe like if you're retiring, you can say like
retirement statement.
Yeah, so like a PR press release. This justification. I was trying to think like I'll come back if, and this is in protest of, so that like beyond just justification, here's like some extra structured metadata, like if this condition is met, then I will come back. So you can display that more prominently maybe if you want. or like this is in protest of, and maybe this is a governance action, so that like when I'm viewing a recently adopted governance action, maybe one of the sections that a blockchain explorer wants to display is like, here's all the people, here's all the DREPs who like retired in protest because of it. Like that's kind of the motivation behind the metadata, is like, what are the like rich exploration type user stories that we can create by tracking stuff explicitly rather than just like a blob of text, right? Because if you just have a blob of text as a justification, you could never, like a computer would never know to like backlink that data.
Maybe also when you go to the DREP retirement can only happen when you had to read the DREP registration. Maybe directly refer back to this as well, and give a direct note as well. When was the DREP actually active? When did it be registered?
So like from the tool perspective, that, I mean, I think that's on chain, because like you'll see when the transaction is published, but that's a good idea for like a user experience that could be created. Are there any fields specific to any of the proposal types, or the governance actions? So we had no confidence, new CC, constitution, protocol parameters, treasury, payout, and info. So like info obviously has the content. The treasury payout probably has like, this is probably where like time and material stuff goes, but like company contracted company information. So like maybe the author has their own DID, but like the company has a DID. So, you know, DC Spark has a DID that they're attaching and saying, hey, here's like who you're actually paying. I'm just the author of the proposal, right? Like maybe SundaeSwap is proposing that we pay DC Spark to build this, you know, really cool thing. And so it's not necessarily the author of the proposal. So like contract, so I guess maybe just target, payment target information. Author. For like protocol parameters, one thing that might be cool in the long term, I don't, again, I'm just trying to get all the ideas out. I'm not sure if this is a good idea to include in the first pass, but like simulation data.
Instead of the target payment information, right? So you mentioned like if SundaeSwap asked put in a proposal to pay DC Spark, for example, right?
Yeah.
But like as a voter, why would I vote for that? Because maybe they're not into it. So how about like a seconder rather than like, you see what I mean? Because I would expect someone to always be the person who was like the person getting paid would be the person putting the proposal forward. Just from
and so that, like, you know,
just from like a confidence perspective as a voter, or maybe in addition to this, we could have like, if there's a seconder that wants to sign or put their name to something.
Yeah. So like the way I would solve that is, you know, have a signature from whoever's receiving the payment saying they consent to actually do this. Because like I think it may be limiting to say, well, like we're just going to assume that the author of the proposal is always the person receiving the money, right? IOG may be saying, hey, we as IOG want to pay these 12 different people who hosted Voltaire workshops, right? And like, you know, we're the organizing entity, and we, you know, are the ones pushing for these workshops, but these people in all these different communities actually went and ran these workshops, and they like, you know, bought food for everybody and hired security and whatever, and like, you know, we're paying that out. And that's not necessarily like the author may be IOG because they're saying, hey, these guys did something really good, or like, oh, these are the people collecting a bug bounty, for example. So like maybe some kind of like category, which is like slightly different than the justification of like, oh, this is a bug bounty, this is for new feature development, this is for pen testing, this is for legal work to establish the MBO, whatever. But yeah, so coming back to this, it would be pretty cool, like if we're proposing a new hard fork to make like beyond just like references, it'd be cool to have simulation data that like could be independently verified in some sense, maybe. So Ryan says this may be outside of the scope of this meeting, but how do you prevent a DREP from misrepresenting the delegators? Is there a governance standard for giving the delegator confidence in the DREP's ability to properly represent, for example, parameter updates? This is like such a hard problem. And part of what we're trying to accomplish is making that data available to anybody who wants it, right? So like by building a block, I'm picturing someday being able to go to cexplorer.io and see a list of DREPs and a list of ongoing governance actions, right? And being able to click around in the same way that if I go to a transaction, right, and I pick a random transaction, this lets me, let's look at the address. And then let's look at their recent transactions, right? This kind of like exploratory behavior. And so I think part of what we're trying to accomplish here is making this data rich enough that exploratory behavior minimizes the risk of DREPs misrepresenting things to the delegators, right? And at the end of the day, it's kind of a problem that can't be solved perfectly, because if the delegator is not putting in effort, then there's no way you can force them to put in that effort to research, right? Even if we had direct democracy and we didn't have a representative democracy, people are just going to click whatever the YouTube personality tells them to, like some portion of people. But by making these tools like super like user-friendly and easy to navigate, we can mitigate that problem, is my hope, right? And why I think that this is a good idea to invest the effort into finding a standard now before we've even, hard forked into this era. We've got about 20 minutes left, and I'm getting pretty tired. I think this is a good list of things. I'm going to go, first I'm going to switch this back to Markdown, because I don't like that it assumed it was YAML. But let's zoom out a bit. I think this is a really good list. What I'm going to do outside of this is kind of try to draft this into, shake the filtering pan a bit and distill it down into like a concrete proposal like this versioning one was. And then I'll host like a follow-up, probably not 2 hours next time. It'll probably be an hour, where anybody can come and kind of review the what I've got and submit their idea, like, help revise on that. And then I'll submit it as a SIP to the actual SIP repository. With the 20 minutes we have left, is there anything anybody wants to talk about? Things that like you expected to see here but weren't covered, or things that maybe are tangentially related that we can leave as context for future meetings? Other SIPs that you think would be worth writing that like this revealed, like, hey, it's kind of outside the scope of this, but we should really be pinning this down as well. Anything like that?
Maybe stressing out a little bit the really on-chain documentation of the stuff. For example, to say, okay, the constitution can be on-chain somehow.
Yeah,
because
I think that's that's really, if you want to fight that fight, take it to SIP 1694 or SIP 1776 or write your own SIP, because like I definitely see the value, and I definitely see the arguments against it, and it's not like a fight that I feel qualified taking up, and is in my mind a little bit outside of the scope of this SIP. in that this is trying to lay down what data should we be tracking and how should we be tracking it, where it's actually stored. So Santiago just joined. So we're kind of tapering off, Santiago. Oh, there he is. Welcome, Santiago. So we're kind of tapering off a little bit. So, sorry you missed most of it. It'll be recorded and you can review that. But we kind of, just to briefly recap what we did, we went over this document. We talked about your proposal from the that you left as a comment. We all really liked this. So in the next draft, I'm going to go through and update this section and this section to say that we're using JSON-LB as a guiding principle. And then we went through and kind of just brainstormed for a while on what types of data might we want to track in the metadata without worrying about like what is the JSON structure of that, because us debating over like JSON field names isn't the most productive use of this time, but just kind of brainstorming on like all ideas for what we might want to track. And I'll update the GIST with this new draft. And then we have some like user recommendations or like recommendations for other projects here. And we kind of discussed some of the wording here. But we're kind of tapering off. Does anybody have anything they want to talk about? Otherwise, I'll give you 19 minutes of your day back.
Nothing for me, but thanks so much for taking the lead on this, Pi, and for setting this up. And I know Jared from our team would have liked to join as well, but he's out of office this week. So for the next one, we'll try to get in.
Yeah, no worries. So I had said that I was going to host this one last week, and then I'm super busy, so it got pushed to this week. So I'm not going to make any time commitments on when I'll do the follow-up, but probably, within the next few weeks, I want to kind of strike while the iron is hot. I don't want to let it go too long, and I'll tweet about it. So if you're here, you're probably either following me or you saw somebody else retweet it. So go and follow me if you want to attend to the next one. It'll be shorter. We'll try to do 1 hour because it'll kind of just be a lot more refined at that point. This was really like I wanted to give space for brainstorming and for input from people. And yeah. Last call for anything anybody wants to say or talk about.
Just second to what Michael said. Thanks a lot for stepping and taking the initiative. And you're a really good host. It's a pleasure to sit in.
Thank you. Somebody's got to do it, and it's I enjoy stuff like this. I enjoy trying to get people engaged for the community, so I don't mind doing it. I'm gonna go ahead. Thanks for everybody for attending. Just to kind of recap what the next steps are, I'm gonna update the GIST with this. I'll tweet out about it. I'll tweet like a brief summary of the things that we talked about for people who weren't able to attend. I'll upload this recording to YouTube, maybe with some editing from our editor. That'll be on the Sundae Swap YouTube channel, and I'll schedule a follow-up, in the next couple of weeks to go over a much more distilled version of this, where like I'm actually outlining a JSON structure for each of these things, and I've put in some thought of like, maybe there's some of these that are redundant or can be unified, and I'll make a recommendation there, and then we can discuss as a community that final format. So thanks everybody for coming out. I'm going to go ahead and end the recording here, and you can stick around or you can leave if you want. And I love you all, and thanks for coming.